I never imagined that the day I buried my father would become the day my life fractured beyond anything I believed possible. I was still wearing the black dress I had chosen that morning while standing in the cold Oregon rain when I stepped into my childhood home, hoping for a moment of quiet after hours of grief and ceremony. Instead, I walked straight into a storm that had been gathering for years without my noticing. The living room smelled of dust and lemon cleaner, the exact scent my mother used whenever she wanted to pretend everything was normal, though nothing in this house had been normal for as long as I could remember. She stood by the fireplace still wearing her funeral suit, her hands clasped together as if she had been practicing a speech, and beside her leaned my brother Mark, whose reddened face and restless movements reminded me of every fight I had tried to forget since childhood. Neither of them looked like people who had just said goodbye to a man they claimed to love. Amanda. Sit down. My mother said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the stale air, and I felt my stomach tighten at the familiar tone that always meant danger was near. I stayed standing, sensing the shift in the atmosphere the way animals sense a coming quake. "We need to handle the house," she continued. "Your father left it to you, and that is not fair to the family, and we are not going to let that stand." My breath caught as if the room closed around me because I had expected grief, but not this, not the hunger in their eyes, not the calculation behind their perfect funeral faces. "I am not signing anything," I said, keeping my voice steady, even while my hands trembled at my sides. Mark moved first, stepping forward with the same swagger he had used in school hallways when he wanted everyone to fear him, his breath tinged with beer, though it was barely late afternoon. "Come on, Mandy, just sign," he said, lowering his voice as if he were being reasonable, though his eyes gleamed with something far colder than reason. My mother nodded, encouraging him, as if she were guiding a child through a task rather than pushing her daughter toward surrender. "I told you I am not signing," I repeated, and the silence that followed was so complete I heard my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then everything happened at once. Mark lunged, grabbing my arm with a force that made my shoulder crack, and my mother shouted something I could not decipher because the room tilted as pain shot through me. I screamed, twisting away, but Mark shoved harder, sending me stumbling into the corner table where my father's old lamp shattered beneath me, scattering glass across the floor like frozen tears. Before I could regain my balance, he grabbed my shoulders and shook me with a rage that made his face unrecognizable, and my mother watched with a look that was not horror, but approval, as if this violence was something earned. The last thing I remember was falling again, my head striking the edge of the hearth, and my mother's voice saying, "Just let it happen. It will be easier if she stops fighting." When I opened my eyes, the world was white and humming, and I realized I was lying in a hospital bed with a doctor explaining that I had suffered a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and a dangerous period of unconsciousness. As his words blurred together, one question rose inside me with the weight of a stone sinking through dark water. Why did my family try to destroy me only hours after we laid my father to rest? The memory of their faces hovered above me sharper than the pain in my ribs, and I felt a cold certainty settle into my chest because what happened in that living room was not an accident or a moment of grief, but something planned, something fed by years of resentment that I had tried too long to ignore. The doctor asked if I had someone to call, but the only names that surfaced were the very people who had put me here. And the thought of my mother or Mark walking into that room filled me with a fear so physical it made the monitors beep faster. I whispered that I was fine, that I did not need anyone but the doctor, looked at me with the weary understanding of someone who had seen too many victims say the same thing, and he gently reminded me that the injuries did not match a simple fall. I wanted to tell him everything. Yet the words stuck as if speaking them aloud would make the nightmare real, and in that moment I wondered how long my family had been waiting for a chance to strike without witnesses. The nurse adjusted the blanket around me, her touch gentle, her eyes kind, and the contrast between her quiet care and the cruelty I had just endured broke something open inside me, and tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. "I think someone tried to hurt me," I finally said, my voice barely audible, and even saying that much felt like stepping onto thin ice, stretching over a lake of secrets. As the nurse nodded and promised that I was safe for now, a sharp truth settled in my mind. If I did not understand why my own family wanted me gone, I would never be safe again, and whatever waited in the shadows of that house would eventually find its way back to me. The room felt smaller as I lay there listening to the distant sounds of carts rolling through the hallway and monitors humming, and I realized that everything I once believed about loyalty and blood had shattered in a single breath, leaving me nothing. I grew up in a house where silence was the only safe language and where love was something I learned to recognize only after I left. My earliest memories are of tiptoeing across creaking wooden floors, praying they would not give me away while my mother barked orders from the kitchen and Mark slammed doors hard enough to rattle the windows. I was 8 when I first realized my mother Linda did not like me and maybe never had. She saved her softest tones for Mark, her little prince, even when he was already big enough to shove me against walls whenever he felt bored or annoyed. If I cried, she scolded me for provoking him. If I stayed quiet, she accused me of sulking. My father David was the only buffer in that house, a calm voice in a storm that never truly stopped. He worked long days as a carpenter, bringing home sawdust in his hair and a gentle smile reserved only for me, a smile that made everything else bearable. When he was home, Mark behaved, or at least pretended to, and my mother lowered her voice as if trying to keep her anger from slipping out where he could hear it. But when he left the house for work, the air thickened, and I learned to count the hours until I heard his truck pulling into the driveway. I still remember one afternoon when I was 12 and Mark was 15. I had borrowed one of his notebooks for school because mine were full and could not afford new ones. When he found out, he dragged me down the hallway by my hair while my mother stood with her arms crossed, asking why I always provoked him. She did not see the tears, or maybe chose not to, and when my father walked through the door later, I told him I had fallen on the stairs because the thought of watching his face shatter with the truth felt unbearable. He had enough weight on his shoulders, and I loved him too much to add mine. At 17, I started saving money in a shoebox under my bed, money earned from tutoring younger students and working summers at the local diner. I did not tell anyone, not even my father, because I knew my mother would find a way to take it if she could, and Mark would see it as an excuse to lash out again. On my 18th birthday, I left home for good, stepping onto a bus bound for Eugene with a single suitcase and the flimsy hope that distance might soften the memories. My father hugged me for a long time before I left, telling me he was proud and to never let anyone dim whatever light he believed I had, even if I could not yet see it for myself. After I moved away, I tried to build a life that did not revolve around fear. I went to college, worked 2 jobs, and eventually became a high school English teacher, something that felt like reclaiming the voice I had never been allowed to have as a child. I called my father every week, sometimes twice, and he always ended our calls by asking if I was eating enough and whether I had met anyone nice. My mother rarely answered the phone when I called the house, and when she did, she spoke as if I were a guest, not her daughter asking why I bothered calling if I was so determined to abandon the family. Mark never called at all unless he needed money, which I never gave. Over the years, my father visited me whenever he could, and I always saw the relief in his eyes when he stepped into my small rented townhouse, far from the tension he lived with daily. He never said anything against my mother or Mark, but I saw the exhaustion in his posture, the way he hesitated before leaving to return home. When he fell ill last year, everything changed. The doctor said it was a stroke and that he needed long-term care. Linda insisted he stay at the house, claiming she could manage his needs, but I knew she was lying. She could not manage compassion, let alone complex care. I visited often, sometimes staying for days at a time, and during those visits I noticed the subtle shift in my mother's attitude. Her disapproval was no longer sharp but wary, like she was bracing for something that had not yet happened. Mark showed up during those visits, too, slamming cabinets, glaring at me from doorways, asking why I was there so much. It became clear they both believed my presence threatened something they wanted to keep control of. When my father passed, he left a will. He told me months before that he had updated it, placing the house solely under my name. He did it quietly to protect me because he knew what Linda and Mark would try to do once he was gone. He said the house should belong to the child who had known the most pain within its walls, the one who would use it not out of greed, but out of hope. His decision was an act of love, but also the spark that ignited everything that unfolded after the funeral. Linda had spent her entire life resenting me for receiving even an ounce of affection she believed belonged to her alone. Mark had spent his entire life expecting the world to bend beneath his anger. Losing the house in their minds meant losing power, losing money, losing the last thing they believed they deserved more than I ever could. So when I stepped into that living room after the funeral, still raw and broken from grief, I should have known their condolences would not come. I should have recognized the glint in their eyes not as sorrow, but as calculation. My father's last act of protection had become in their eyes a betrayal, and I became the living embodiment of everything they believed they lost. What I did not yet understand was how far they would go to take it back, or how deeply rooted their resentment had grown while I spent years believing I had escaped them. When the doctor finally left my bedside, the quiet in the hospital room settled around me like a thick fog, and for the first time since waking, I became aware of the weight of the bandages wrapped around my ribs and the steady ache pulsing at the base of my skull. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting everything in a pale, sterile glow that made the world feel distant and unreal. I tried shifting my body, but pain flashed across my side, sharp enough to force a gasp from my throat. A nurse hurried in, holding a clipboard, her expression gentle but observant in a way that made me feel as though she already suspected more than I had said. She asked how I was feeling, and before I could answer, she added that the doctor noted my injuries did not match the explanation I had mumbled earlier about slipping on a piece of furniture. I felt heat rise in my face because even half-conscious, I had defaulted to the lie I had used my whole life, the lie of pretending violence was an accident. The nurse gave me water, then paused, studying me with a tenderness that caused an unexpected tightness in my chest. "If someone hurt you," she said, "you can tell us. This is a safe place." It was the first time I had heard the word safe spoken to me in years, and it nearly broke me. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and then a voice I knew all too well slithered into the room. Mark stood in the doorway, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his expression arranged into something that resembled concern if one ignored the tension jittering beneath the surface. The nurse straightened and asked him to identify himself. "I am her brother," he said smoothly, and the ease in his tone made my skin crawl. "I came as soon as I heard she fell." Fell. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. The nurse frowned but stepped aside after noting his name, though she did not leave the room. She stood near the door, arms crossed, watching him closely. Mark leaned closer to my bed, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Do not even think about telling them anything. You know how Mom worries. You already ruined her day enough." I stared at him, unable to speak for a moment, not because of fear, though fear was present, but because I had not realized until then how deeply he believed his own lies. He spoke as though I had orchestrated my injuries to inconvenience him and our mother. As he straightened, he tapped the blanket near my leg, a gesture that might have seemed affectionate to anyone else but to me felt like a warning. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Where is Mom?" He shrugged. "She is making calls, sorting out things for the house." It was casual, dismissive, but I heard the emphasis on house, and something inside me tightened. Mark caught the flicker of emotion and smiled, slightly pleased that his words hit their target. "Anyway," he added, "you should get some rest." The nurse stepped forward, reminding him visiting time was over. He left without another glance, and I exhaled shakily, not realizing until then how tense my muscles had been. After he walked out, the nurse returned to my side, her voice firm but kind. "You are in danger," she said quietly, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that startled me. "People do not get injuries like yours from a fall." I looked away, wrestling with the part of myself that still wanted to protect the people who had never protected me. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, a police officer appeared in the doorway, flipping open a small notepad. The nurse had reported concerns as she was required to do. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering as he asked if I wanted to make a statement. I hesitated because the habit of silence ran too deep, but the memory of my mother's voice saying, "Let it happen," and Mark's hands gripping my shoulders sent a trembling clarity through me. I was about to answer when something occurred to me, something that made my blood run cold. My purse. My phone. The envelope from my father. I asked the nurse for my belongings, and she brought a plastic bag holding my wallet keys and cracked phone. But the small manila envelope my father's lawyer had mailed, the one containing the updated copy of his will, was gone. I felt the room tilt as the realization settled in. Someone had taken it while I was unconscious. I sucked in a sharp breath, and the officer noticed, asking if something was wrong. I told him my bag was missing something important, and he wrote the note down, but when he asked what had been inside, I paused, unable to say it aloud, because naming it felt like placing a target on my back. The officer said they would open a report and stepped out to request camera checks, though I already knew no one would have seen my mother or Mark if they moved fast enough. The nurse rested a hand on my shoulder, promising that the hospital would keep me safe for now, but her expression suggested she doubted they could keep that promise if my family truly wanted to reach me. I lay back against the pillow, fighting the rising panic as pieces of the puzzle began to align. My fall had not been an accident. My disappearance from the house had not frightened them. The missing will was not a coincidence. Someone had come into this room where I lay unconscious and taken it. As the machines continued their steady rhythm beside me, I understood something chilling. I was not dealing with a moment of grief gone wrong. This was a plan, a deliberate attempt to erase me from the equation entirely. And if I did not leave the hospital or find someone I could trust, I would not survive whatever came next. Sarah arrived the next morning, just after sunrise, the soft glow from the window outlining her familiar silhouette in a way that made my throat tighten. She was still wearing her work scrubs, her hair pulled into a messy bun, the same look she had worn through every crisis of my adult life. When she saw the bruising on my face and the way I held my ribs, she froze for a moment, shock widening her eyes before she crossed the room in 3 quick steps. "Amanda, what did they do to you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with the kind of anger only someone who truly loves you can feel. I could not answer without my voice breaking, so I shook my head, and she understood enough to let the silence hold us for a moment. She waited until the nurse finished checking my vitals, then eased into the chair beside my bed, gripping my hand as if grounding both of us. "The police report," Sarah asked. "Finally, did you tell them?" I wanted to say yes, but the truth hung heavy between us. "I told them what I could," I said, but I could not bring myself to tell them everything yet. Sarah pressed her lips together, frustration flickering across her face, but she did not push. She knew better than anyone how deep the wounds from my childhood ran and how fear could twist logic into silence. She waited a moment before asking where Linda and Mark were now. The thought alone made my stomach drop. "Mark came to the hospital last night," I said. "He told me not to say anything, and he looked so calm, like he honestly believed he had done nothing wrong." Sarah swore under her breath, the word sharp enough to cut through the sterile air. "They will not stop," she said softly. "You know that, right, Amanda? They will not stop until they get what they want." The truth of her words settled over me like a cold blanket, because deep down I had known this long before Sarah said it aloud. There were no limits to what my family would do for control, and I had spent years pretending otherwise. A knock on the door interrupted us. A hospital administrator stepped inside, holding a clipboard and a cautious smile. "Ms. Hale, she said the officer handling your report would like to speak with you again." My pulse spiked. Sarah squeezed my hand. "You do not have to speak to anyone until you are ready," she whispered. But I knew I had no choice. Someone had taken the will from my belongings, and whoever it was would not stop there. The officer re-entered the room, the same one from the night before, but today his expression was more serious. He pulled a chair beside the bed. "Ms. Hale, there is something you should know." A chill moved down my spine. "According to hospital security, someone entered your room during the night." My breath caught. "Who?" "A woman matching the description of your mother," he said quietly. "She claimed to be checking on you. She left a few minutes later." Sarah let out a strangled sound somewhere between disbelief and outrage. I felt my ribs tighten as though someone had wrapped a band around my chest. He continued, "The cameras did not capture the bag search clearly, but your missing items were noted by staff an hour after she left. We are opening a theft investigation." Theft. As if what they were trying to take from me was not so much larger than that. After the officer left, Sarah turned to me, and the fear in her eyes mirrored the fear rising in mine. "You cannot stay here," she said. "They already got into your room once, they will do it again." I knew she was right. Hospitals were supposed to be safe, but safety meant nothing when the threat came wrapped in family ties. I looked around the room at the thin curtains, the open doorway, the nurses passing back and forth, and realized there was nowhere to hide inside these walls. Sarah stood pulling her keys from her pocket. "I am taking you out of here," she said. No hesitation. No doubt. I blinked at her, searching for the right words, but she had already moved to gather my things. Before the nurse could protest, Sarah explained that she was my emergency contact and that she was transporting me to a private residence for safety. It was not entirely true, but close enough that no one stopped her. They wheeled me out through a back exit to avoid Mark in case he returned, then helped me into her dusty Subaru that still smelled faintly of coffee and eucalyptus. As soon as we pulled away from the hospital, I felt my shoulders loosen just slightly, though the ache in my ribs reminded me with every breath how fragile my body had become. Sarah drove toward the Cascade foothills where her family kept a small cabin they rarely used except for holidays. When we reached the long gravel driveway, she parked beneath towering pines and helped me inside, settling me onto the couch with blankets and pain medication. For a long while, we said nothing, listening only to the wind sliding through the trees like whispers from another world. "Amanda," Sarah said finally, her voice low and steady, "I need you to tell me everything." So I did. I told her about Linda and Mark demanding the house the way my mother watched as Mark shoved me, the sound of my skull hitting the hearth, the missing will, and the feeling that all of it was only the beginning. Sarah listened without interrupting her expression, shifting from anger to horror to a fierce protective determination. When I finished, she inhaled slowly. "This is not just family drama," she said. "This is criminal. They assaulted you. They stole legal documents. They are trying to force you out of your inheritance. They will not stop until they get exactly what they want." Her words stung because every one of them was true. She leaned forward, gripping my hands. "You need evidence, Amanda, not guesses, not memories. Evidence is the only thing that will make the police listen." The room felt smaller as I absorbed the truth. I had spent my entire life running from my family, but running had never stopped anything. They had already reached into my hospital room. They would reach into every corner of my life until there was nothing left of me. Sarah squeezed my hand again, her voice filled with the steadiness I desperately needed. "We fight back," she said, "not with fear, with the truth. And evidence." I nodded, though my ribs protested the movement because deep inside a spark I had long forgotten began to flicker. Not courage yet, but the possibility of it. The next morning, the cabin was cold enough that my breath fogged in the air as I sat wrapped in a thick blanket, staring at the mug of tea Sarah had placed in my hands. I had not slept more than a few minutes at a time. Flashes of the living room, the fall, the hospital, and Mark's voice slicing through my dreams every time I closed my eyes. The pain medication dulled the edges of the aches in my ribs, but it could not soften the sharp fear that sat lodged beneath my sternum. Sarah stepped into the room carrying her laptop and a stack of papers. She set them on the coffee table, then sat across from me, her expression serious in a way that told me she had been awake long before dawn, searching for answers. "Amanda, there is something you need to see," she said, sliding a document toward me. It was an article from the local courthouse website listing public records. My eyes skimmed the page twice before the meaning sank in. Mark had accrued nearly $180,000 in debt in the last 3 years. I blinked, unable to process the number. "How?" Sarah clicked through the tabs. "Gambling mostly," she said. "Loans, some credit card defaults. Your brother has been drowning financially, and it looks like he hid it from everyone except maybe your mother." My mind reeled. The Mark I knew had always been impulsive, reckless, entitled, but I had never imagined the scale of the mess he had created. I felt a slow, cold understanding wash through me. If he sold the house, they could erase everything they owed. And if I stood in the way, then I was not a sister or a daughter. I was an obstacle, a liability. Sarah pulled out another paper, this one folded and creased as if handled too many times. It was a copy of a delinquency notice from the Oregon Department of Revenue. Linda had fallen behind on property taxes 2 years in a row, thousands of dollars overdue. They were not just desperate, they were cornered. I leaned back, letting the information sink its claws deeper into my breathing spaces. No wonder they pushed me after the funeral. No wonder their eyes held no grief. They had been waiting for that moment. Sarah then mentioned the call she had received early that morning from my father's attorney, Mr. Carlson, a man who had always treated me with kindness. He told Sarah that my father had mailed me a packet 1 week before he died, containing a certified copy of the updated will. According to his records, it should have arrived the morning of the funeral. My breath stilled. It had arrived. I had placed the unopened envelope in my purse, planning to read it when the day was less heavy. It was that envelope that had gone missing at the hospital. Someone stole it, and now I understood exactly why. My father's original will named both children as recipients, but the updated one gave the house solely to me, along with a letter that he had written explaining why. Linda must have known about the update, or suspected it strongly enough that she needed to eliminate any possibility that I could prove ownership. Sarah continued, speaking her voice low but relentless. Carlson said he sent another copy through the office mail, but it never reached you. I rubbed my temples, feeling the pressure build behind my eyes. Someone intercepted it, probably before it ever left our family property. Sarah nodded, because that is exactly what I think. Your mother has always controlled every inch of that house. Nothing moved without her knowing. I felt nausea rise again, this time not from the concussion, but from the dawning awareness that my mother did not simply dislike me. She had been waiting for the moment my father's protection was gone, to finally tilt the balance of power where she believed it always belonged. She wanted the house, she wanted control, and Mark wanted salvation from his debt. I took a shaky breath. Why now? Why push so quickly after the funeral? Sarah looked at me as though the answer was obvious. Because grief makes people vulnerable, and monsters thrive on timing. The weight of her words pulled at something deep inside me, something that felt like recognition. I stood slowly, wincing as pain radiated down my side, and walked to the window overlooking the slope of pines. My father's voice drifted back to me from a memory long buried. Promise me, Amanda, you will never let anyone take what I leave you. I had promised, but I had never imagined the threat would come from inside the walls that had raised me. As I stared out at the filtered sunlight through the trees, Sarah's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, her eyebrows lifting. "It is Carlson again," she said. I froze as she answered. His tone was urgent enough that she put him on speaker. "Ms. Hale." He said your father kept detailed financial journals for tax purposes. I found notes about the house appraisal and his attorney fees. The update to the will was entirely intentional. He wanted you protected. I felt tears sting unexpectedly. Then he continued, there is more. He had told your mother privately about his decision 2 months before he died. He wanted transparency. According to his notes, she did not respond well. A sharp chill spread through me. The pieces clicked into place with an almost cruel clarity. Linda had known the house was no longer hers. She had known for months that she would lose control once my father died, and she had been waiting for the exact moment to reclaim what she believed she deserved. After the call ended, Sarah lifted a torn envelope from the table. This was in the cabin mailbox, she said. It looked like it had been opened, then taped shut. My heart lurched. The return address was from my father's attorney. With shaking fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was nothing. Not a single page. Not the will. Not the letter. The contents had been stolen. Again. I let the envelope fall to my lap as a hollow ache expanded inside my chest. This was not coincidence. This was not fear or panic or even delusion. Someone was erasing every trace of my inheritance. Sarah sat beside me, her voice steady even as worry creased her brow. Amanda, you need to understand something. This is not about grief. This is not about family conflict. This is about money and desperation. And people who are desperate do not stop. My mind drifted back to the living room, to my mother's cold eyes, the way she had watched as Mark attacked me not with shock or horror, but with permission. My ribs throbbed with memory. My skull pulsed with the echo of impact. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of a plan they had been arranging for months. I closed my eyes, fighting the tremor in my voice as I whispered the terrifying truth that had finally settled in me. They were willing to kill me for that house. The rest of that day passed in a blur of uneasy quiet, the kind that feels less like peace and more like the air holding its breath before a storm. The cabin creaked softly as the temperature shifted, pine branches scraping against the windows in slow arcs that made my nerves jump every time. I sat curled beneath a blanket on the couch, trying to convince myself the isolation should feel comforting, but comfort was a luxury my body no longer recognized. Each throb in my ribs reminded me of hands that wanted me gone, and every echo from outside made me wonder if they were already closing in. Sarah spent the afternoon reinforcing the idea that I needed a plan, not panic. She moved around the cabin with the steady pragmatism of someone who worked emergency rooms for a living, pulling curtains shut, placing her phone charger on the side table, setting out a flashlight near the door. She was not preparing for danger because she was afraid. She was preparing because she believed danger was already on its way. "You need proof," she repeated for the third or fourth time. "Hard evidence. No one is going to take your word over theirs, not when you have a concussion and a complicated family history." I hated how right she was. The police had listened politely, written notes, made promises, but none of that would matter if Linda and Mark painted me as unstable, emotional, grief-stricken. They had already lied at the hospital, and they would do worse if it meant controlling the narrative. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I finally found my voice enough to say what had been pressing against my throat since morning. "They are going to come for me." Sarah did not deny it. She simply sat across from me, folding her legs beneath her and holding my gaze with a calm seriousness that steadied me more than anything else had in days. "Which is why we get ahead of them," she said. The fear inside me curled tighter, but beneath it, something else stirred the faintest thread of resolve. I had spent my childhood surviving that house, surviving their anger, surviving the quiet cruelty that seeped into every corner of my life. I was tired of surviving. I wanted to fight, but fighting meant going back into the lion's den. The thought alone made my stomach twist. "We need the original documents," Sarah continued, "the ones they stole, the proof of your father's intentions, the proof of the forgery. We need anything that ties them to what happened." Before I could answer, her phone buzzed loudly on the table. She picked it up, then froze, her eyes narrowing. "What?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. Sarah turned the screen toward me. An unknown number. No voicemail. A minute later, the phone buzzed again. Same number. My pulse quickened. "Answer it," I whispered. She hesitated, then accepted the call, placing it on speaker. Neither of us spoke. For a long moment, there was only silence, the kind that prickles along your spine. Then a distorted voice whispered, "Amanda, sign the papers, or this gets worse." Sarah's eyes widened. I felt ice slide down my spine, cold and heavy. The voice continued, "You cannot hide forever. Family is family." Then the call ended. For several seconds, I could not breathe. They had found the cabin. They knew I was here. I gripped the edge of the blanket with trembling hands. Sarah ended the call and immediately disabled her caller ID. Her movements fast but controlled. "This changes everything," she said. "You are not safe here either." I nodded, though every muscle in my body felt like stone. The world had become too small to outrun them. We sat in silence until my ribs stopped throbbing enough for me to speak again. "I need to go back to the house." Sarah stared at me as if I had suggested walking into traffic. "Absolutely not. They nearly killed you." "They will try again." I shook my head. "I know. But that house has answers. My father kept everything. Receipts, letters, old tax forms. If Linda and Mark are panicking, it is because something is still in there. Something they have not found yet. Something they know I could find." Sarah ran a hand through her hair. She wanted to argue. I saw it in the tension of her shoulders. But she also knew I was right. Evidence does not vanish without reason. Someone was trying to bury it. That meant there was something worth burying. Finally, she exhaled a long, reluctant breath. "If you are going back," she said, "I am going with you. We leave after dark." My heart pounded at the thought, fear and determination clashing like two storms inside me. I was terrified of returning to that house, terrified of the memories engraved into its walls, terrified of the hands that had thrown me across its floor. But I also felt something I had not felt since before the funeral, a faint pulse of agency like a heartbeat I thought long dead. While Sarah prepared a small backpack with gloves, a flashlight, her old college laptop, and a portable battery, I tried to steady my breathing. I reminded myself this was not the same as going back alone. I had a plan. I had support. I had purpose. As the hours passed, the forest outside shifted into darkness, the cabin becoming a small island of dim light surrounded by endless night. I paced slowly around the room because sitting still only made the dread louder. My father would not want me to live in fear. He had left me the house because he believed I deserved peace. He had trusted me to protect myself and what he wanted for me. Now, everything depended on whether I could honor that trust. A car engine rumbled in the distance, the sound muffled but distinct, and Sarah instantly moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside by an inch to look out. For a moment, we both froze, listening. The engine idled, then faded away. Probably nothing but the spike of adrenaline made my hands shake. "We cannot wait until morning," I whispered. Sarah nodded. "Then we go now," she said. "Bring a jacket." The cabin door creaked when we opened it, the cold night sweeping in, brushing against my bandages and making me shiver. I stepped outside, feeling the weight of the forest pressing close, but also the faint stirring of resolve in my chest. Fear walked beside me, but so did something else. Determination rising slowly like dawn beyond the tree line. As we headed toward the car, I realized that this was the first step of reclaiming my life from people who had tried to crush it. And though my body ached with every movement, my mind was clearer than it had been in years. If they wanted a war over that house, they were about to learn I was not the frightened girl they raised. The drive back to my childhood home felt like descending into a memory I had spent half my life trying to outrun. The closer we got, the more familiar landmarks emerged from the darkness like ghosts rising from a field. The sagging mailbox my father never got around to fixing. The cracked sidewalk where Mark once pushed me so hard I skinned both knees. The porch light that always flickered because my mother refused to replace the bulb unless it embarrassed her in front of guests. As Sarah slowed the car at the end of the street, my pulse began thundering so loudly I feared she could hear it. We parked 2 houses away, our headlights off. The Hale house stood shrouded in darkness except for a faint glow from the kitchen window. My stomach twisted. They were awake, waiting. Or maybe just incapable of sleeping now that their plans faced resistance. Sarah touched my arm, grounding me. "We go through the back," she whispered, quick and quiet. "You tell me if anything feels off." I nodded, though the word off hardly captured the terror prickling across my skin. We slipped out of the car, moving through the cold night air, the smell of damp earth rising with every step. The front yard looked the same as it always had, brittle grass thinning in patches, like the house itself was balding from neglect. We skirted around the shrubs toward the basement door, tucked behind the garage, a door my father used whenever he returned home late from work so he would not wake us. I had forgotten the way the hinges groaned until we were inches from them. Sarah paused, listening. No voices, no movement. She pulled a small toolkit from her pocket, one she kept in her car for emergencies, though neither of us had imagined it would one day be used for breaking into the home where I once learned to walk. With steady fingers, she slipped a thin metal shim between the door and its frame, and within seconds the latch gave with a soft snap. I swallowed hard as we stepped into the darkness. The air inside the basement was cold and stale, carrying the familiar scent of damp concrete and old sawdust from my father's workbench. The memory of him sanding wood late into the night flickered in my mind, easing the tightness in my throat for a moment. He had always said that the basement was the heart of the house. Now it felt more like its tomb. Sarah clicked on a small flashlight, keeping the beam low. "You know where he kept everything," she whispered. "Lead the way." I moved slowly toward the back wall where an old shelving unit held boxes of Christmas ornaments, tax folders, and years of forgotten clutter. Behind those shelves was the small closet where my father had kept his personal safe. It was not hidden, but it was discreet, and he had always assumed honesty in the people he lived with. I reached the closet door and opened it inch by inch. Dust floated in the narrow beam of the flashlight as the familiar safe came into view, tucked beneath a stack of old toolboxes. But the moment I saw it, my breath caught. The dial was scratched. Deep, fresh scratches gouged into the metal as if someone had tried again and again to break in. They tried to open it, I whispered, and Sarah crouched beside me inspecting the damage. Someone was desperate, she murmured. Did your father ever tell you the combination? I nodded, but dread tightened inside me because when I reached forward and tried the code my father had shown me when I was 16, the knob refused to turn. The code had been changed. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Why would he change it unless he suspected someone else might try to get inside? And more importantly, who had changed it after he died? Sarah looked at me carefully. Amanda, this safe mattered to him. Whatever is inside is exactly what they want. Before I could answer, the house shifted above us, floorboards creaking in the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps. My whole body went rigid listening. Someone was home. Someone was awake. Sarah immediately turned off the flashlight and grabbed my wrist, guiding me into the shadow beneath the stairs. We crouched low as the footsteps moved closer to the basement door, pausing there long enough that I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated. A door shut somewhere deeper in the house. Sarah leaned close, whispering, "Breathe. Just breathe." When the fear settled enough that my hands stopped shaking, Sarah touched my arm, signaling that we had to move quietly and quickly. We returned to the closet and I scanned the shelves again, searching for anything that might hold the original code or maybe documents my father never placed in the safe at all. That was when my eyes landed on a wooden crate half hidden behind a paint can. I slid it out. Inside were binders filled with old repair receipts and tax filings. But near the bottom was something that made my heart stop. A file labeled in my father's handwriting, "Estate Planning, open only if necessary." I opened it. Inside were notes about appraisals, letters between him and his attorney, and a list of accounts. But tucked between the pages was something else, a slip of paper bearing my name with a handwritten message. "If you find this, Amanda, trust your instincts. Protect yourself. Protect the truth." My breath trembled out of me. He had known. Not everything, maybe, but enough to fear what would happen when he was gone. Before I could process the note, Sarah tensed beside me, her grip tightening painfully on my forearm. Voices drifted from upstairs, muffled but unmistakable. I recognized them instantly. Linda's sharp-clipped tone, Mark's lower, impatient growl. My skin turned cold. They were awake, they were arguing, and they were close. Sarah motioned for silence. We slipped away from the closet and crawled behind the old sofa stored near the rear wall. From there, I heard the words clearly enough to make my blood chill. "If she comes back, Mark was saying we finish it. We cannot risk her finding anything else." Linda hissed back. "Keep your voice down, someone might hear." Mark lowered his voice, but the venom remained. "She already knows too much. Tomorrow, we deal with the rest." My throat clenched. They had not just planned to intimidate me. They intended to eliminate me, permanently. Sarah's fingers squeezed mine silently, urging me to stay still. As the voices receded, Sarah whispered in my ear, "We are getting out right now." But before she could pull me toward the exit, my gaze landed on a folder that had fallen from the crate. It was stamped with my father's name, and beneath it a partially signed document. When I lifted it, my breath froze. It was a property transfer form forged with a sloppy imitation of my signature. Proof. A surge of adrenaline shot through me, clearing every trace of pain or hesitation. I tucked the folder beneath my jacket. Sarah motioned again, time to go. We moved silently across the basement floor, navigating around boxes until we reached the door. But as Sarah slowly pushed it open, a faint pool of light spilled down the staircase. Someone upstairs had turned on the hall lamp, and then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving toward the basement door, again quick and purposeful this time. Sarah's eyes widened. We darted toward the old coal chute door on the far wall, a small exit my father once used to carry firewood inside. The metal screeched faintly as we pushed it open, but we had no choice. The basement door rattled behind us, someone testing the lock. We scrambled outside into the cold night air, dirt clinging to our clothes as we crawled through the opening. Sarah pulled the chute door closed behind us just as the basement door burst open inside. We sprinted across the yard, ducking behind the shed, holding our breath as a flashlight beam swept across the window. Only when the beam turned away did we run slipping through the side gate and into the darkness beyond. My ribs ached with every step, but I pushed forward, clutching the folder against my chest. We had made it out, and we had proof. But as we reached the safety of the car, I understood something with bone-deep clarity. They knew someone had been inside the house, and they were not going to wait until tomorrow to finish what they started. The drive back to the cabin was silent, in the way only terror can be silent, thick and heavy and pressing against the inside of my lungs. Sarah kept her hands tight on the wheel, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, scanning the road as though Mark's truck might materialize from the darkness at any moment. I clutched the stolen folder to my chest, unable to loosen my grip even when my fingers began to ache. Every bump in the road jolted my ribs and sent a throb of pain through my side, but none of it compared to the storm twisting inside me. The forged property transfer form was undeniable proof of intent, but it was the voices we overheard that played on repeat inside my head. If she comes back, we finish it. Hearing those words from my brother's mouth had been horrifying enough, but the quiet authority beneath my mother's voice was something worse. Something that clung to me like cold air sinking into bone. We reached the cabin and slipped inside, quickly locking the door and pulling the curtains tight. Only then did Sarah turn to me, her expression sharp with worry. "Amanda, sit down," she said. "You are shaking." I had not realized it, but the moment she pointed it out, my entire body trembled uncontrollably. I lowered myself onto the couch as carefully as the pain in my ribs allowed. Sarah sat beside me and reached for the folder. "Can I see everything you grabbed?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. She opened the folder and scanned the forged signature, her eyes narrowing. "This is bad," she murmured. "Very bad for them. You could go to the police with this alone." But I shook my head. "It is not enough. They will claim it was a misunderstanding. They will get lawyers. They will twist it. They always twist things." Sarah hesitated before asking the question hovering between us. "Amanda, what exactly do you think is still hidden in that house?" I looked at the note from my father, still tucked into the file, the one he had written in shaky, careful handwriting. "Trust your instincts. Protect yourself. Protect the truth." My voice cracked when I finally answered. I think he knew something about Mom, something he did not write explicitly because maybe he was afraid someone else would find it. Sarah placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "What truth would he be protecting you from?" I swallowed hard. My father never wanted to admit it out loud, but he knew. He saw what she did. He saw how she treated me, how she encouraged Mark's behavior. He tried to protect me by giving me the house, but maybe he feared that when he died, she would do anything to undo that protection. Sarah studied me, then the folder, then back again. "There is more we are missing," she said softly. "Something important. Something that scared your father enough to leave you a message." I knew she was right. What we had found so far was only the surface. The real rot went deeper. Sarah stood and began pacing the room, tapping her fingers against her thigh, the way she always did when her brain moved faster than her words. "There was a journal upstairs," she said abruptly, turning to me. The handwriting looked old. "Wait, what journal?" "The one you found in Linda's closet last year when you visited. You said she snapped at you for even touching it." I frowned, trying to recall. A vague memory surfaced, a small notebook on her dresser with a faded floral cover. I had reached for it absent-mindedly, and my mother slapped my hand away with such force it startled my father. I had completely forgotten it until now. Sarah's eyes sharpened. "Amanda, what if that journal has everything? Her thoughts, her plans, her resentments. It might explain why she is doing all of this." A chill rippled through me because the idea felt too close to truth. My mother had always carried her bitterness like a shield, but she kept her deepest rage tucked beneath years of practiced disapproval. She was not impulsive like Mark. She was deliberate, cold, calculated. "We need that journal," Sarah said. My pulse stuttered. "We barely made it out alive tonight." "I know," she said, "and I am not saying we go back right now, but we will have to, because there is something else." She retrieved her laptop from the table and pulled up a message she had received while we were driving. It was from her cousin who worked as a clerk in the county recorder's office. The message was short but devastating. "New property transfer filed today under Hale Estate, reviewed by petitioner Linda Hale. Effective pending signature of beneficiary Amanda Hale." My head spun. She already filed it. Without me. "She is trying to push it through," said Sarah. "She wants the house legally hers before you can fight back." My breath trembled. "She cannot do that. It is illegal. Not if she convinces the court you are unstable or unfit to handle the estate. You were in the hospital unconscious with head trauma. You have old records of anxiety from college, and she will use every bit of it." I sank back into the couch as the room seemed to tilt. My mother had not just tried to force my hand. She was attempting to erase me, legally, financially, physically, and she had confidence because she believed she understood the system better than I did. Sarah knelt in front of me, her eyes fierce. "We need the journal. We need anything that shows her intent. Without that, we are fighting blind." I pressed my palms to my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. I had spent years avoiding my mother's darkness, trying to convince myself that distance alone could keep me safe. But I had underestimated her resentment. I had underestimated her desperation. I had underestimated her. As the hours dragged toward dawn, the cabin felt too small to contain the storm building inside me. Every breath reminded me of the bruises spreading beneath my skin. Every heartbeat reminded me that my father's last act of love had become a threat to my life. My mother had always viewed affection as a limited resource that she alone deserved. When my father gave pieces of it to me, she had felt robbed. When he left me, the house, she felt humiliated. And now she was reclaiming control, the only way she knew how. I closed my eyes and remembered the look she gave me at the funeral. Not grief, not sorrow, just calculation, a weighing of odds, a decision already made. When I opened my eyes, I whispered the truth I had been resisting for years. "She hates me in a way I cannot fix." Sarah placed a hand over mine. "And now we make sure she can never hurt you again." I nodded slowly as the weight of that truth settled into something colder and sharper. This was no longer about inheritance. This was survival. My father had left me the house out of love. My mother would try to steal it out of spite, and I would not let her. Somewhere in that house lay the last piece of truth I needed to expose everything. And even though every instinct told me to run, another instinct deeper and fiercer whispered back, "It is time to go back and face exactly who she is." I barely slept the night after Sarah and I pieced together the depth of my mother's betrayal. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw my father's handwriting, the forged signature, the safe with its fresh scratches, and above all, the cold expression on my mother's face as she watched Mark shove me. The cabin felt too still, too quiet, as if the silence itself were waiting for something to break. At dawn, Sarah brewed coffee, though neither of us drank more than a sip. The plan was simple in theory, but terrifying in execution. We had to go back to the house, not for the safe, not for the folder, but to look for anything my father might have hidden in his final months. Evidence. Something concrete enough to leave the police no room for doubt. But I knew deep inside that the most valuable thing in that house was not the documents or the safe or even my father's cryptic note. It was his distrust. The undeniable truth that a man who once believed in the goodness of people had grown afraid in his own home. Sarah watched me pace the cabin floor, her voice steady despite the exhaustion lining her features. "We go in fast, we check the places your father trusted most, and we get out. No risks, no wandering. We stick together." I nodded, though part of me already doubted I had the strength to return. The house loomed in my mind like a place carved out of my worst memories, and every time I imagined stepping inside, my ribs tightened. But I would not let my mother and brother destroy my father's legacy. Not again. By mid-morning, we were back in Sarah's car heading toward town. The roads were empty, the sky painted with heavy gray clouds that threatened rain. The closer we drove, the more my heartbeat seemed to sync with the rumbling of the tires against the pavement. When we turned onto my childhood street, I felt my stomach clench. The house looked the same as the night before, but somehow worse in the daylight. Something about the peeling paint and sagging gutters made the house look less like a home and more like a creature watching us approach. Sarah parked behind a row of overgrown hedges where Mark would not immediately notice her car. We scanned the windows. No movement, no voices, no flickering lights. I swallowed hard. If they were inside, we would know soon enough. We approached the back of the house, moving quickly toward the mudroom door. Sarah tested the knob. Locked, but the basement coal chute was still accessible. I crouched beside it, my ribs protesting, and pressed my shoulder into the metal panel until it lifted just enough for Sarah to slip her fingers underneath and raise it fully. The stale smell of the basement drifted out. I crawled in first this time. As soon as my knees hit the concrete floor, I froze, listening for footsteps above. Nothing. Sarah followed and closed the chute behind us. We moved toward the stairs, though. Instead of going up, we veered toward the kitchen door that opened from the basement. It was unlocked. That alone set every alarm in my body ringing because my mother never left a door unlocked. She carried keys like talismans. She controlled locks like they were symbols of order. Something was off. Sarah gestured for me to stay behind her. She pushed the door open slowly. Sunlight filtered into the kitchen through sheer curtains. The counters were clean. Too clean. The kitchen was never spotless. My mother lived in a constant state of controlled chaos, but this was unnatural. As my eyes traveled the room, something caught my attention near the spice cabinet. A small black dot on the wall. Something so small most people would never notice it. I stepped closer and my heart lurched. It was a lens, a camera lens. A hidden camera pointed directly at the kitchen table, the place where most of our fights had happened growing up, the place where she had always sat across from me with her sharpened words and cold disapproval. My breath hitched. Sarah came close, inspecting it. "This is definitely recording," she whispered. We searched the rest of the kitchen carefully, pulling back curtains, opening cabinets, scanning corners. 3 more cameras were positioned discreetly. One facing the hallway archway, one angled toward the living room, and another pointed at the back door. "My father must have installed them," Sarah said softly, "probably after he changed the safe code." The weight of that realization pressed down on me with a force that nearly buckled my knees. My father had been afraid. He had set cameras not to spy, but to protect himself or me, or both. Sarah located the main receiver unit behind the microwave, disguised inside an old cookie tin. She lifted it onto the counter dust, falling off its edges. The receiver was wired to a small external drive. If the footage was intact, it could contain everything. She plugged the drive into her laptop. A folder popped up immediately. Hail footage labeled by date. My hands trembled as Sarah clicked the most recent file. The video opened. The kitchen appeared just as it had the night of the funeral, the dim lighting, the scattered plates, the tension thick enough to taste. Then the footage cut to Mark pacing angrily near the sink. Linda stood at the counter, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp. "If she does not sign tonight," Linda snapped, "then we make her." Mark scoffed, rolling his shoulders like he was warming up for a fight. "She will break. She always breaks." Linda moved toward the table, her voice lowering, but not enough to conceal the venom. "Your father made a mockery of this family. He left everything to her of all people. She does not deserve this house. She never has." My stomach knotted so tightly I nearly doubled over. Sarah reached for my wrist, grounding me as the video continued. Mark said, "What if she tells someone?" Linda answered clearly, "Then we do not give her the chance." She paused, her gaze intense, cold, deliberate. "If she leaves here without signing, we make sure she cannot cause us problems again." My vision blurred, my chest constricted. She had not just allowed the attack, she had orchestrated it. The video shifted again. The moment I walked into the living room that night. My mother pulled a folded document from her pocket, sliding it across the table. Mark stood behind me, blocking my exit. Me, shaking my head, refusing to sign. My mother's face sharpening. Then Mark's hands on my shoulders. The shove. My fall. My mother stepping back, not in fear, but in satisfaction. Sarah paused the footage and placed her hand over mine. "Amanda, this is enough to put them away." I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. My father had set these cameras months before he died. He must have known something. He must have been afraid. And he must have hoped his recordings would one day protect me. Sarah clicked on another file, one from the week before the funeral. My father sat at the kitchen table looking frail, the camera recording him unaware. He rubbed his temples, shaking his head as my mother stood across from him. "You cannot leave it to her," Linda hissed. "She does not deserve it. She never helped you. She abandoned us." My father's voice was quiet but steady. "Linda, stop. You are hurting Amanda every day. You and Mark. I will not leave her with nothing." Linda slammed her hand on the counter, then said something that froze my blood. "If you give her that house, you will destroy this family. You think she cares about you. She will take everything." "She is your daughter," he whispered. "She is your daughter, too." My mother said nothing. She simply turned and left the room. My father sagged in his chair, looking suddenly older. Sarah stopped the video, then exhaled slowly. "There is no defending this. This is premeditated. This is attempted coercion. This is assault. This is conspiracy." I pressed a shaking hand to my mouth as realization swept over me in a devastating wave. My father had spent his last months living in fear of the very people he shared a home with. He had tried to protect me even as his strength faded, and my mother had spent those same months planning his undoing and mine. As the rain began to beat softly against the windows, Sarah removed the drive from her laptop and tucked it safely into her jacket. "Amanda," she said, her voice firm and steady, "you are not just a victim. You are the key to bringing them down." I nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside me, a resolve forged from grief and fury and finally undeniable proof. My father had left me the truth tucked inside his house, and now it was time to use it. We left the house with the external drive tucked securely into Sarah's jacket, our footsteps fast but quiet as we hurried through the overgrown yard toward the cover of the hedges. Every breath burned against my bruised ribs. Every shift of my weight sent pain shooting up my side, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The sky had darkened into a heavy curtain of clouds threatening rain. Again the air charged with the electric stillness that always comes before something breaks. Sarah checked the street twice, then unlocked the car. I had just opened the passenger door when the unmistakable growl of an engine tore through the silence. A truck turned onto the street. Mark's truck. My throat closed. Sarah whispered, "Get in now," but there was no time. The truck accelerated, headlights slicing across the asphalt like twin blades. Sarah grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the narrow gap between the hedges and the garage. We ducked just as the truck rolled past, inching toward the house at a crawl. He had seen something, or sensed something. Mark stepped out, slamming the truck door. Even from a distance, I recognized his posture, shoulders hunched, fists clenched, anger radiating off him like heat. He walked toward the front door, pounding on it. "Mom, open up. We need to talk now." Sarah mouthed, "We need to leave," but as she reached for my wrist, gravel crunched behind us. A second set of footsteps. A shadow moved. Linda emerged from the side yard holding a flashlight. My breath froze. Sarah pushed me back against the garage wall, but Linda had already spotted the movement. "Amanda!" she hissed. Her voice sharpened into something terrifyingly triumphant. "I knew you would come crawling back." Before I could react, she raised the flashlight and its beam hit my face like a spotlight catching prey. Mark stormed toward us, and before Sarah could shield me, he grabbed my arm and yanked me forward. Pain exploded through my ribs so violently that black spots swarmed my vision. "You think you can steal from us," he snarled. "Coming into our house, going through our things. Our things." The word echoed inside my skull like a cruel joke. The house had never belonged to him. Or to her. My father had made that choice out of love, and they twisted it into something monstrous. Sarah positioned herself between us, pushing at Mark's chest, shouting at him to stop, to let me go, but he shoved her aside with the back of his arm, sending her stumbling into the garage wall. I screamed her name, but before she could regain her balance, Linda stepped in her eyes, gleaming with something colder than rage. Resolve. I told you, Linda said, her voice chillingly calm. You should have signed when we gave you the chance. Then she turned to Mark. Take her inside. Mark tightened his hand around my wrist, dragging me across the yard. My feet slipped in the wet grass, my lungs struggling against the sharp ache radiating from my ribs. Sarah lunged again, but Mark twisted, shoving me forward. I hit the mudroom doorframe so hard my vision split in two and a cry tore from my throat. They hauled me into the garage, its dim light flickering above us. My knees buckled, but Mark did not loosen his grip. Linda shut the door behind us, then stood in front of it, blocking any chance of escape. The garage smelled of gasoline and old paint, the familiar scent of my father's tools long gone, replaced by the claustrophobic heaviness of betrayal. Linda stepped closer, her face inches from mine. He never should have given that house to you, she whispered. He knew what that would do to this family. You destroyed everything. I blinked through the dizziness. He wanted to protect me. Her expression hardened. From what? From us. The truth hung between us like an exposed wire. Mark shoved me backward, and my legs hit the edge of the step leading to the interior door. I toppled down the short flight onto the cold cement floor. Pain ripped across my ribs so violently I choked on my own breath. Linda snapped, "Do not let her get up." Mark moved fast. He was on me in seconds, grabbing the front of my shirt, lifting me enough to slam me down again. The impact rattled through my skull. A scream tore out of me, but it only made him angrier. "You could have made this easy," he spat. "You could have signed. You think you are better than us. You think Dad loved you more." Linda hovered behind him, her voice sharp with panic masked as fury. "Hurry up!" "We do not have time. The police will believe anything she says. We finish it now. Finish it." The word detonated through my mind. This was not a beating. This was a killing. They meant to end my life here in the same garage where my father once repaired my bicycle. Mark reached for something on the workbench, a heavy wrench, its metal catching the flickering light. My heart lurched. Sarah burst into the doorway before he could raise it. She swung a broom handle with all her strength, striking Mark across the shoulder. He dropped the wrench with a clatter. "Amanda, get up. Now!" I tried, but my body refused to move. Sarah grabbed my arm, helping me to my feet, but Linda lunged, grabbing my hair, yanking me backward. I screamed as white-hot pain shot across my skull. Sarah punched her arm away, screaming at her to let go. For a moment, everything dissolved into a blur of limbs and shouting. I twisted free, stumbling toward the steps, but my foot slipped on the concrete and I fell. I felt myself tumbling downward. My head hit something sharp, a cold crack of bone against metal. Then nothing. Darkness swallowed everything. When I opened my eyes again, the world was blinding and white. I was back in the hospital. Machines beeped. A nurse hurried toward me. "You are awake," she said, relief softening her features. "You are very lucky. You suffered a serious concussion and several new fractures." I tried to speak, but my throat burned. The nurse continued, "The police brought you in. You were found unconscious on your family's property. Sarah is here. She saved your life." Memories slammed back into me in jagged fragments. The wrench, the fall, my mother's voice saying, "Finish it." A tremor ran through my hands. The nurse adjusted my pillow gently. "You need to rest," but I could not close my eyes. Not now, because now the truth was undeniable. My family had not just attacked me, they had tried to kill me. And this time, I had the injuries, the witnesses, and the evidence to prove it. I woke again hours later this time to the soft murmur of voices outside my room and the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor tracking every spike of fear running through me. My head throbbed beneath the bandages and my ribs felt as though someone had wedged knives between them. But even through the fog of pain, the memory of the attack in the garage came back with brutal clarity. Mark's hands on me, Linda's voice ordering him, the wrench, the fall, the darkness. I shifted slightly, wincing, and that tiny movement must have triggered the motion sensor because Sarah appeared in the doorway almost instantly. Tears welled in her eyes as she rushed to my side, but she held herself together for my sake. "You scared me half to death," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "You have been in and out for almost a day." I swallowed my reply, my throat raw, but Sarah understood anyway. "They are in custody," she said. They were arrested. A police officer stepped into the room, then a tall man with a calm voice that managed to soften the tension in his shoulders. "Ms. Hale, I am Detective Rowan. I am very sorry you are going through this, but I need to gather some information as soon as you feel up to it." I nodded slowly, though the room tilted for a second. He pulled a chair closer, keeping his voice low and steady. "You were found at the bottom of the garage steps. EMS documented the injuries carefully, and we also have a witness." Sarah straightened. "I saw everything after I broke in. I told them exactly what they did." Rowan nodded, then added, "But there is more. We searched the property under emergency circumstances given the severity of your injuries, and we recovered several items." He placed a clear evidence bag on the table, revealing the external hard drive we retrieved from the kitchen earlier that day, the one carrying the camera footage. My breath caught. Rowan continued, "Before you lost consciousness, you were holding on to it. You must have grabbed it without realizing. The footage is still intact." Relief washed over me, raw and overwhelming. For the first time in my life, I held undeniable proof in my hands, proof no one could diminish or twist or gaslight away. "We reviewed part of the recordings," the detective said. "They show clear intent to coerce you into signing property transfer forms and clear evidence of assault and conspiracy before the second attack." His expression darkened slightly. "Miss Hale, the footage is devastating." A mix of grief and vindication rose inside me, bitter and heavy. He paused, allowing me to breathe before continuing. "We also found forged documents in the home, a property deed with what appears to be your forged signature. That alone is a felony." I looked at Sarah, who nodded, confirming what we both already knew. They were planning this long before the funeral. Rowan flipped open his notebook. "I need you to walk me through the events starting from when you woke in the ER after the first assault." His voice was gentle but firm, offering structure in a moment when everything inside me felt scattered. So, I told him everything. The missing envelope my father's lawyer sent, Mark's threats in the hospital, Sarah taking me to the cabin, breaking into the house, hearing my mother and Mark plotting to finish it, the forged documents, seeing the safe, finding the folder, and finally the second attack in the garage. Speaking the words aloud made my hands shake uncontrollably, but Sarah held my shoulder until the trembling slowed. Rowan listened without interrupting, taking notes, carefully, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he closed the notebook. "Ms. Hale, thank you. Your testimony aligns exactly with the evidence collected so far." He hesitated before adding, "But I need to prepare you. This case is going to move quickly, and it is going to be difficult emotionally. You will need to testify. You will need to relive some of this, but we will protect you through every step." I nodded again, though my body felt heavier than the blankets covering me. Rowan leaned forward slightly. "There is one more thing. Your mother and brother are both being charged, but their stories do not match. Mark claims he never meant to hurt you, that he was following your mother's instructions. He is panicking. When he realized we had the footage, he asked for a lawyer. He is already contradicting himself." My stomach twisted. "What about Linda?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "She denies everything. She claims you staged the footage, claims you attacked yourself in the garage, claims the forged signature was planted." Sarah let out a shocked, bitter laugh. "Incredible!" Rowan shrugged grimly. "She is digging her own hole. But she will lawyer up, and this will be intense. If you want an attorney, the state can appoint one, or you can retain your own." Before I could respond, a soft knock echoed from the doorway. My father's lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, stepped in, removing his hat out of respect. When he saw me, his face softened. "Amanda, I am so sorry." I asked him how he knew I was here, and he replied gently, "The police contacted me when they realized the estate documents were involved. The good news is the original will is still valid. Your father filed it directly with the probate court before he passed. No forged transfer can override that." A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it made my eyes sting. Whitaker continued, "But this will go beyond probate. You are now at the center of an assault case, possibly attempted manslaughter given your injuries. And the evidence you found your father's note, the video recordings, the forged paperwork, all of it confirms a pattern of coercion. The door opened again, and a nurse stepped inside, reminding everyone that I needed rest. Rowan stood. I will be back tomorrow with updates. In the meantime, you are under protective observation. No visitors unless approved by me or hospital security. I blinked. Protective? From who? Rowan exchanged a look with Sarah before saying softly, Linda tried to call the hospital. She attempted to claim emergency medical power of attorney for you. My whole body froze. She wanted legal control over my care after trying to kill me. The nurse stepped forward, her tone firm. Do not worry. We blocked the call. She has no control here. Not anymore. After they left, I lay back exhausted, staring at the ceiling as the reality of everything settled over me like heavy snowfall. For the first time in years, I was not shrinking in fear or excusing someone else's cruelty. I was fighting back, and I was not alone. The evidence was on my side, the law was on my side, and for the first time in my life, justice felt possible. Sarah pulled the blanket up to my shoulders and whispered, We are going to win this, Amanda. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of her voice soften the ache in my chest. My mother and brother had spent years teaching me I was powerless, but now they were the ones trapped by their own decisions, by their lies, by their violence. And tomorrow, the legal battle would begin. I woke on the morning of the preliminary hearing with a knot in my stomach so tight it felt like it was cutting off my breath. The hospital had discharged me 3 days earlier under protective order, and Sarah picked out a simple navy dress for me because she said it made me look grounded, calm, unshakable. I did not feel unshakable. My ribs still ached when I inhaled too deeply, and the fading bruises along my cheek reminded me of every moment in that garage. But as we approached the courthouse, its tall concrete pillars standing firm against the gray Oregon sky, something inside me steadied. My father deserved justice, and I deserved to be believed. The courtroom was already packed when we stepped inside. Rows of benches filled with reporters, community members, and retired teachers who knew me from my years at the high school. I saw whispers ripple like wind across wheat fields as people recognized my injuries. But the room went silent when the bailiff opened the side door, and my mother and brother were let in wearing county-issued clothing and handcuffs. Linda's hair was neatly curled as if she were attending a brunch instead of a hearing. Mark looked smaller than I had ever seen him, shoulders slumped, eyes darting around, unable to meet mine. They sat beside their attorneys, and for a moment I saw exactly what they were. Two people who had spent a lifetime convincing themselves I was the problem. Two people who had underestimated me entirely. Judge Ramirez entered her robe crisp and her gaze sharp enough to slice through stone. She surveyed the courtroom, then nodded to the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Mariah Keegan, a woman with fierce intelligence in her eyes. Ms. Keegan began by outlining the charges with calm precision. Your Honor, the state charges the defendants Linda Hale and Mark Hale with assault in the first-degree conspiracy to commit assault, attempted extortion, attempted property theft, and fraudulent signature on a legal estate document. Gasps echoed softly through the gallery. Then Ms. Keegan continued. We intend to demonstrate a clear pattern of coercion and targeted violence intended to force the victim, Ms. Amanda Hale, to relinquish her lawful inheritance. I felt every eye turn toward me, but I kept my chin steady. The defense attorneys rose next. Mark's lawyer tried to paint him as a man misguided by grief, traumatized by losing his father. Linda's lawyer used a different tactic entirely, claiming my mother was the true victim of a hysterical daughter who self-inflicted her injuries to gain sympathy in a family dispute. The courtroom erupted in murmurs until Judge Ramirez slammed her gavel. Order. Bring in the evidence. Miss Keegan dimmed the lights slightly, and the first video began playing on the large monitor. The hidden kitchen camera footage. There was my mother pacing in her robe, voice sharp as a blade, as she told Mark to make sure I signed the documents. There was her saying, I do not care what you have to do. She has had everything her whole life. Now it is our turn. My stomach twisted hearing her words echo through the courtroom. The recording continued, showing Mark picking up the forged deed and rehearsing what he would force me to sign. The room filled with horrified whispers. Even the court reporter paused her typing for a second. Mark's lawyer stood quickly objecting. "This video was obtained illegally. Your Honor, it cannot be admitted." Judge Ramirez raised a single eyebrow. "The victim retrieved the footage from her own home while fleeing for her safety. That is entirely lawful." "Objection overruled." Mark slumped as the footage resumed. The next exhibit was the forged deed. A handwriting expert testified that the signature was an unmistakable forgery. Then came the medical examiner who confirmed my injuries were consistent with being hit, thrown, and pushed downstairs, not from a fall or accident as the defense claimed. But the most devastating moment arrived when the garage footage played the second assault captured by a neighbor's motion-activated camera. Even though it only caught partial angles, the audio was painfully clear. Linda screaming at Mark not to let me leave. Mark yelling at me to shut up. A crash, my cry, the thud of my body hitting the stairs. Reporters covered their mouths. One older woman in the back row quietly wept. My mother stared straight ahead, showing no remorse. When the prosecution rested, Judge Ramirez turned to the defense. "Call your first witness." To my shock, my mother stood. She took the stand, and with the ease of someone who had lied, her entire life began weaving a story where she was the fragile mother trying to protect me from myself. "Amanda has always struggled emotionally," she said, voice trembling. "I tried to help her. She attacked us when we confronted her about her behavior." I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. Miss Keegan stood slowly. "Cross-examination, Your Honor." She approached the witness stand, eyes narrowed. "Ms. Hale, is this your voice on the recording instructing your son to force Amanda to sign documents?" My mother kept her chin high. "That recording is manipulated." Miss Keegan did not blink. "So the forged deed also magically appeared without your involvement?" "I had nothing to do with that. And the attack in the garage, is that also fabricated?" My mother hesitated only for a fraction of a second, but enough for the entire courtroom to see. "Linda Hale, you were heard shouting, 'Do not let her get away on the recording.'" My mother's jaw tightened. I was afraid she would hurt herself. The courtroom erupted again until the judge called for silence. Mark testified next. He stammered, sweating through every question. He contradicted himself multiple times and eventually admitted that he had forged the signature, but claimed he did so because my mother begged him. Linda whipped her head toward him, eyes flaring with betrayal. The courtroom leaned forward. Miss Keegan asked the final question. "Did your sister ever attack either of you at any point?" "No." He whispered it barely audible. "Did your mother instruct you to hurt Amanda?" Mark's voice broke. "Yes." Silence swallowed the room whole. Finally, the judge addressed the court. "I have heard enough. The evidence shows overwhelming proof of coordinated coercion and assault. This case will move to sentencing." My breath released in a shaky exhale. Not victory, not closure, but justice beginning to take shape. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a cold Thursday morning in early December, the kind of Oregon day where the air felt heavy, damp, and metallic, like the world itself was holding its breath. I woke before my alarm and sat on the edge of Sarah's guest bed, staring at the soft gray light seeping through the curtains. I should have felt relief that the trial was over, that the truth had been exposed, that for once the system believed me. But instead, I felt a strange hollowness, the ache of realizing that even when justice comes, it does not stitch the past back together. It only tells you what happens next. Sarah drove me to the courthouse in silence, her hand occasionally brushing mine as if to remind me I was not alone. The building loomed ahead, tall columns cutting upward toward the colorless sky. Reporters stood outside, waiting to capture the moment a mother and son would be sentenced for attacking their own daughter and sister. I kept my head lowered and walked quickly, ignoring the flashes that popped like tiny explosions. Inside the courtroom was fuller than ever. The same teachers who had watched my back during trial returned for sentencing. Neighbors from my father's old street sat together grim-faced, as if they too were grieving the family they thought they knew. In the first row, my father's best friend Peter folded his hands and nodded softly when he saw me, a gesture saying, "You made it through." Then the bailiff opened the side door and Linda and Mark were escorted in wearing orange jumpsuits and restraints. They looked different than before. The arrogance they carried like a second skin had eroded. Mark's shoulders curled inward as though he were trying to disappear. Linda's hair was disheveled, her face pale with the realization that her story, her control, her decades of manipulation were no longer enough to save her. They avoided looking at me as they sat beside their respective attorneys. Judge Ramirez entered with the same steady, unwavering presence she had shown throughout the trial. She wasted no time. Before this court issues sentencing, the victims have the right to speak. The victims? She meant me. My throat tightened, but I rose when called and made my way to the podium. The courtroom blurred at the edges, but the judge's face remained focused and calm, grounding me. I began slowly. Your Honor. I never imagined I would stand in a courtroom and testify against my own mother and brother. I paused, letting the words settle. For years, I believed that if I stayed quiet, kept distance, or avoided conflict, the hurt would lessen. It never did. When my father died, I thought we would honor him with dignity. Instead, they tried to take everything he left me. Not just the house, but my safety, my voice, my life. My voice cracked, but I kept going. I loved my father. He protected me when I had no one else, and now I stand here protecting the last thing he entrusted to me. I nodded to the judge. Thank you. I sat down trembling but proud of myself for saying every word I had swallowed for decades. Mark's attorney asked if Mark could speak. The judge allowed it. Mark stood slowly, chains clinking. His voice shook. I am sorry. I should have stopped this. I should have stopped her. He gestured toward Linda without looking directly at her. I almost believed he meant it until he added, I only did what she told me. That was the moment I realized Mark would never take full responsibility because doing so would require him to confront the truth of who he was. Linda rose next unprompted. Her attorney tried to hold her back, but she pulled free and approached the podium. Amanda is lying. She has always been dramatic. All my life, she had to be the center of everything. She attacked us. We only defended ourselves. A murmur rippled through the room. I stared at her stunned, but not surprised. Her eyes were cold void of remorse. She pointed at me. You destroyed this family. Judge Ramirez's stern voice cut through the tension. Miss Hale, that is enough. Please return to your seat. Linda tried to continue, but the judge raised her voice sharply this time. Now. Linda sat down fuming as though she were scolded for spilling a drink rather than being sentenced for violent felonies. Judge Ramirez folded her hands deliberately as she prepared to speak. This court has reviewed extensive evidence, including audio-video footage, forged documents, multiple expert testimonies, and eyewitness accounts. She paused, turning her gaze toward Linda first. Ms. Hale, your actions display clear intent to harm your daughter. You orchestrated a violent assault, attempted to steal property entrusted to her by her deceased father, and manipulated your son into participating in criminal behavior. Your age does not excuse your choices. She looked at Mark. And Mr. Hale, you knowingly participated in an assault that resulted in serious bodily injury. You forged legal documents, attempted extortion, and acted with blatant disregard for the safety and rights of your sister. She straightened. Therefore, the sentence is as follows. For Mark Hale on the charges of assault in the first degree, attempted extortion, and forgery, this court sentences you to 10 years in state prison. A heavy silence fell. Mark closed his eyes and exhaled as if accepting the inevitable. Then the judge turned to my mother. For Linda Hale on the charges of conspiracy to commit assault, elder abuse, and coercion and attempted property theft, this court sentences you to 3 years in state prison followed by 5 years supervised probation. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Linda's face contorted in disbelief. She stood suddenly pointing at the judge. You cannot do this. I am her mother. That should count for something. Judge Ramirez did not flinch. It does. It counts as a greater betrayal. Sit down or you will be held in contempt. Linda collapsed into her chair, stunned into silence for the first time in years. The judge continued. Ms. Hale, you will also undergo mandatory counseling for aggression management and family violence prevention upon release. After delivering the sentence, she looked directly at me. Ms. Hale, meaning me since I had reclaimed my last name, you showed extraordinary courage in bringing this case forward. This court acknowledges the severity of what you endured and commends your resolve. Court is adjourned. The gavel hit wood, echoing like thunder. Reporters rushed forward, but the bailiff blocked them. Linda sat frozen, stunned. Mark bent forward, sobbing into his cuffed hands. As deputies escorted them out, Linda finally looked at me. In her eyes, I saw confusion, shock, fear, and the unmistakable realization that she no longer held any control over me. I rose slowly, feeling years of weight lift from my shoulders. Sarah squeezed my hand, whispering, "It is over." But I knew it was not simply over. It was beginning. The weeks after sentencing unfolded slowly, like my life had shifted into a quieter gear I had never experienced before. For the first time in years, I woke without the weight of dread pressing against my ribs. The bruises on my body faded long before the bruises on my heart did, but each morning I found myself breathing a little easier, a little deeper, as if reclaiming space inside myself that had been occupied by fear for far too long. I returned to my father's house 2 days after Linda and Mark were taken into custody. Walking up the front steps, I hesitated, half expecting to feel the old sadness that used to greet me whenever I crossed this threshold. But instead, I felt only the soft ache of memory. The house smelled faintly of cedar, just like it had when my dad was alive. His old flannel jacket still hung on the hook near the entryway. I touched the sleeve gently and whispered, "I made it, Dad. I kept your promise." Sarah arrived with paint samples and takeout sandwiches, determined to help me reclaim the house from everything it had become in the final months of my father's life. We spent hours cleaning, repairing, patching holes in the drywall that Mark had punched years ago, replacing broken tiles and rearranging furniture. Every stroke of the paint roller felt like wiping away another layer of pain. I decided to redesign the house according to my father's long-held dream of creating a peaceful retreat. He had always imagined this space as a sanctuary filled with warm colors, soft lighting, and the gentle hum of wind chimes on the back porch. I brought in pale oak shelves, earthy rugs, and handmade ceramic lamps. In the living room, I hung a framed photograph of my father taken on the day he completed building the backyard deck. He looked sun-kissed, proud, and content in a way I wanted to remember forever. One evening, sitting alone in the newly arranged living room with a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, I realized something surprising. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt safe. It felt like mine. Healing did not come in a dramatic wave. It came in small moments. The first night I slept 8 hours without waking from nightmares. The morning I stood on the back porch and felt sunlight warm my skin without bracing myself for danger. The afternoon when I laughed with Sarah about Mark's old high school haircut, something I had not been able to do in years without feeling guilty. I started journaling again, something I had abandoned after my father's death. I wrote letters to my younger self, letters filled with gentleness, forgiveness, and love. In one entry I wrote, "You deserved a home that felt safe. You deserved family that lifted you up instead of tearing you down. You deserved love without fear." I cried while writing those words, but they were tears of release, not despair. Returning to my job at the high school was another milestone. My students greeted me with hugs and handmade cards. One student, a quiet boy who rarely spoke, handed me a small rock he had painted with the word "brave." I carried it in my pocket for weeks. Inspired by everything I had been through, I applied for a small state grant to start a community program for survivors of domestic violence. The idea emerged one night when I realized how close I had come to losing everything and how many people in similar situations might never have the chance to escape. I wanted to use my story to make sure they were not alone. The grant was approved with overwhelming support from the district. We transformed one of the unused classrooms into a calming resource center with warm lights, a coffee station, and shelves stocked with information about legal aid shelters and counseling. I named it the Hale Haven in honor of my father. When I unveiled the center to staff and community members, I felt a sense of pride that made my chest expand rather than tighten. This was my beginning. not a chapter written out of pain, but one built from purpose. Of course, healing did not mean forgetting. Some days I still woke to the echo of my mother's voice or the memory of Mark's hands pushing me down the stairs. But now, when the memories came, they did not swallow me whole. They reminded me of what I survived and why I could never go back. Once the house was fully restored, I decided to hold a small gathering to honor my father. Friends, neighbors, and former coworkers came filling the home with laughter and warmth. Someone brought my father's favorite lemon bars. Another brought a stack of old photographs from his community volunteer days. Standing in the center of the living room, surrounded by love instead of fear, I felt something loosen inside me, something that had been tangled for decades. Toward the end of the evening, I stepped outside to the backyard where my father and I had spent countless hours talking about life. The wind rustled through the cedar branches above like a quiet voice. I whispered, "I am healing, Dad. I am building the life you wished for me." A small wooden bench still sat beneath the tallest tree. I placed a fresh sunflower beside it, the same flower I brought to his grave every year. When I stood up again, I felt lighter, as if the sunflower itself absorbed a piece of my grief. Later that night, I sat on my bed in the room that had once been a battleground of childhood pain, but now felt clean, warm, and filled with possibility. I opened my journal and wrote one final message for the day. Healing is not a destination, it is a return to myself. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and lay back on the soft quilt with a deep, steady breath. For the first time in a long time, the future did not scare me. It welcomed me. In the months that followed the renovation of my father's house and the opening of the Hale Haven, I found myself thinking more deeply about what justice actually meant. Not the kind handed down by a judge, though that mattered, but the quiet kind a person builds day by day in how they choose to live after surviving the unthinkable. People often assume justice feels like triumph, like a moment when the world finally sees what you endured and rewards you for your pain. But for me, justice felt more like returning to myself piece by piece, reclaiming the parts of my story that had been overshadowed for so long by fear, manipulation, and silence. The more I rebuilt my life, the more I understood that survival was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a responsibility I had never expected to carry. When I started speaking with other survivors who visited Hale Haven, I heard echoes of my own past in their voices. Some were still living with their abusers, others were escaping, and a few were rebuilding just as I was. They came from different towns, different jobs, different generations, yet their stories shared the same thread. Fear had taught them to make themselves small. Love had been weaponized into control, and silence had been demanded as the price of belonging. Every time I sat with one of them in that warm little room with its gentle lighting and the soft hum of the heater, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I did not build Hale Haven to become a hero. I built it so no one would ever again feel as alone as I once did on the night my mother and brother tried to break me. One afternoon, while reviewing grant paperwork, I found a letter addressed to me in handwriting I did not recognize. It was from a woman in her 70s who had read about my case in the local newspaper. She wrote, "If someone had helped me 50 years ago, I might have lived a different life. Thank you for giving others the chance I never had." I held the letter against my chest for a long moment, realizing the ripple of one person's healing can spread farther than we ever expect. That night, I sat on the back porch watching the late summer sky shift into deeper shades of gold and lavender. The air was warm with the scent of pine and lavender from the garden bed I planted in the spring. I thought of my father and how he used to sit in this exact spot after long days of work, letting the world quiet itself around him. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I hope I made you proud." For a long time, I blamed myself for not seeing the danger in my family sooner. But healing taught me something essential. It was never my job to predict the choices of people who refused to love me well. It was only my job to survive them and rise anyway. People often ask me how I found the strength to confront my own blood in court. The truth is, I did not find strength. I remembered it. It had been inside me all along, buried under years of self-doubt and fear. I want anyone listening to my story to understand this clearly. Blood is not loyalty. Family is not defined by DNA. Family is defined by the people who stand beside you when the rest of the world turns dark. Family is the hand that steadies you, the voice that believes you, the friend who drives you to the courthouse or helps you paint over the stains of the past. And family can also be the people you choose to walk away from so you can save yourself. Domestic violence is not always obvious. It is not always broken glass or bruises or screams in the middle of the night. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is the look that tells you your feelings do not matter. Sometimes it is the voice that convinces you your pain is an inconvenience. And sometimes it is the betrayal that comes from the very people who were supposed to protect you. If my story teaches anything, I hope it teaches this. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to rebuild. You are allowed to choose peace, even if it means stepping out alone. And you are allowed to demand justice even when the people hurting you share your last name. The court may have delivered a sentence, but the deeper justice came from reclaiming my life, my voice, my dignity. It came from refusing to be defined by the cruelty of others. It came from choosing healing over bitterness, purpose over fear, and truth over silence. Now, whenever I step into Hale Haven, I feel a warmth that fills me from the inside out. I see people beginning the same journey I once feared taking alone. I see courage in faces that have known too much pain. I see possibility growing where despair once lived. And every time I lock eyes with someone who whispers, "I am scared, but I am ready," I feel my Father's presence again. Gentle, strong, steady. The future is still uncertain, but I am no longer afraid of it. I am walking into it with intention, with hope, and with a heart that has learned how to protect itself without closing. If you are listening to this from your home, your car, your workplace, or from a small room somewhere trying to gather the strength to make a change, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not alone. You are not broken. And you are not beyond rebuilding. If my story resonated with you, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what part spoke to you the most. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have survived your own storms, I hope you know this truth deep in your bones. Blood made us relatives. Choices made us strangers. But healing made me whole again. If you have stayed with me through this entire journey, thank you. Your presence here matters more than you know. Every time someone listens to a survivor's story all the way to the end, it pushes back against the silence that so many of us were forced to endure for years. And if my voice reached you today, I hope it reminded you of something important. You are stronger than the people who tried to break you. You are worth more than the ones who walked away when you needed them most. And your story, no matter how painful, deserves to be heard and honored. If this story touched you in any way, I want to invite you to take a moment and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. It seems small, but it means so much. When I read comments from people across the country and around the world, it feels like we are building a community together, a place where survivors, supporters, and everyday listeners can connect, learn, and maybe even heal a little. If you know someone who might be struggling with a toxic family, an abusive partner, or the heavy weight of silence, consider sharing this video with them. You never know how much a single story can change a person's life. Sometimes hearing that someone else made it out is enough to spark hope. Sometimes seeing justice delivered gives someone the courage to take their first step towards safety. And sometimes people just need to know they are not the only ones who have walked through darkness. If you feel comfortable, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Every video here is crafted with the same intention to shine a light on the truth, to give space to voices often ignored, and to remind people that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds. Your support helps this channel reach others who might desperately need comfort or guidance. And if you want to help more directly, consider writing a short message of encouragement to anyone reading the comments who might be going through something similar. A single sentence can sometimes feel like a lifeline. Before you go, I want you to remember this. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to rebuild your life. You are allowed to choose the people who deserve a place in your heart. And if your own family has hurt you, you are allowed to walk away without apology. Thank you again for being here, for listening, and for giving survivors a place to be seen. Wherever you are, whatever time it is as you watch this, I hope you carry this message with you into tomorrow. You are worthy, you are strong, and you are not alone.